Welcome to Free Your Children TV. I am your host, Tiffany Boyd, and our mission here at Free Your Children is to share the truth and love about education. There's a battle raging for the souls of our nation's children, and I hope this ministry and this TV show will equip you for battle. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of His might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the devil. Ephesians 6:10 through 11. As I said in my intro, Free Your Children is dedicated to sharing the truth and love about education, but also preserving parental, educational, and constitutional rights and equipping parents with the knowledge they need to fight for those rights. I am very honored today to have Connie Reguli with me here in the studio. Connie and I connected a while ago now. We've done several shows in the past together, and Connie has a message and a ministry as well. So Connie, will you introduce yourself to our viewers and tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I practiced law for 28 years in Tennessee, primarily family law. I worked with a lot of parents and families who were struggling through the Department of Children's Services, having their children taken. I found this department to be so aggressive. I really dug into studying it. But as an attorney, I really started doing citizen lobbying back in 2008. And I went down to the General Assembly. I mean, I barely even knew what a state representative was. And I really just want to say that for people, because you and I are in a place now where we get it and we're so entrenched in it, and we really want to reach out to people to bring them along beside us.
Absolutely.
So, people call me all the time about their cases, and I talk to them, and I just always say, who's your state representative? And they say, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's where I started. And I started in 2008. I went in and I started talking to legislators about the Article 6 of the Tennessee Constitution, which says that they can remove a judge. They don't even have to impeach them. So that's where I started. I really took on DCS, just really strong. I studied their policies, their laws, their budgets, their private contractors. I mean, who's getting money? What are they doing with it? And the federal law. And so I organized the Family Forward Project through social media. So the Family Forward Project is just a grassroots group of citizen lobbyists, mostly families who've been affected. We just have a Facebook group, Family Forward Project, and then we have a Family Forward for each state, where we encourage people to create a conversation within their states. We go to Washington, D.C. I'm very proud to say that we helped get 2018 legislation passed, and we have a bill now that is before the Congress, and we're going up again in May to find some more sponsors for it. I mean, and we are just a ragtag bunch of mamas, and we just go up there and we just march those hallways and sit down and talk to people. And I know you've had a lot of conversation about the state General Assembly. I have actually found the federal legislative aides to be much more welcoming and listening and, willing to learn and want to know what they can do to help. So then I just, I've worked in this with the Tennessee laws for years and years. I always deal with the aftermath of what the General Assembly has done. And so, we started really engaging this year after we saw 1214 last year.
Absolutely. And what you said just then, it really resonated with me, and I'm certain probably a lot of viewers out there. This is really overwhelming to people that have never participated in this. And I get the same thing with, Free Your Children, because I have a rather large, Facebook following, because that's where I created originally my ministry. And of course, now we have the website, freeyourchildren.com, where people can find us, and the radio show and the Rumble channel and the Spotify and all those things. And so people will reach out and ask the same types of questions, and they're embarrassed, and they will say, can you help me find, who my representatives are? And I tell them, the only dumb question is one that you don't ask. Don't feel bad that you don't understand the process. You will learn as you go. And it's a great way to engage your children, because as you learn, when you explain to them how the process works, then they're learning too.
Absolutely.
And then and that's what we want to do. We want to educate so that we have people who can watch and monitor what's going on and get involved in the political process. So I'm certain that you help people all the time navigate the process. It is quite the show.
Well,
and quite the experience.
Well, and just to kind of talk about some of the nitty-gritty. So our Tennessee Constitution says that a bill has to be heard 3 times, right, before they can pass it.
Right.
Now, the creators of our Constitution really, I mean, honestly, if you just kind of logically look at it, they did that so that there would be discussions.
Yeah, checks and balances.
Or that there would be discussions,
Right,
because it has to be over 3 different days.
Exactly.
And people would have a bill in front of them. It also says that the caption has to say what the bill's about, which we know is not
And
always
we've
true.
determined that is a lie.
Right, that has not happened. But, that's the reason they had a subcommittee and then a committee and then the floor. But what has happened is, people grovel it out in the subcommittee. They only do yay or nay votes. There's no roll call voting.
Right.
And then, those same people are in the full committee.
Yep.
And, they just, by the time you go and speak to them again, they're pretty much thumbing their nose at you, right? Like, ho-hum, we've heard this before.
Yeah, we know what she's going to say.
Yeah, we know where this is going. And then on the floor, it's a straight party line vote.
Right.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's a party vote. And
Exactly.
very few things get any more open discussion. Now, we've had a couple of hot items this year.
Oh,
but
yeah. This
rarely.
year, we were discussing this before we started recording, and you made a statement that you feel like this is the worst legislative session for families.
For families,
right? I
yes.
agree with that. I kind of got involved in the legislative realm, and let me back up by saying that when I first founded For Your Children, the original intentions and purpose were to equip parents to assume the responsibility of educating their children at home. Because, I'm a former public school teacher, but we've homeschooled for 20 years. So I was getting lots of questions about homeschooling. So people would contact me and want to know how they could legally navigate the homeschooling world. So originally I was just consulting, offering encouragement, and then the Wellbeing Child Check initiative happened back during COVID. And I, of course, was really concerned about that because we were homeschooling, so our children weren't in school. And, of course, when the schools closed, they wanted to institute or initiate this program that was going to allow them to come into the homes, all homes, no matter how you were educating your children, and perform a well-being child check to essentially make sure that you were parenting your children according to the government standards, which was a huge red flag, especially for families that weren't in the system, because we were like, wait a minute, why do they need to come in our homes and check on our children?
Well,
we're doing all the same things we've always been doing. And so, major pushback. It was actually the support group that I had founded at that time that realized that it had been even uploaded to the Tennessee government website. And I had a phone call about it. And so then we wound up shutting the switchboard down at the Capitol because we had so many parents irate.
Well, and the reason from the child welfare standpoint, the reason they were going to do the well-being child checks is because 30% of the referrals come from schools.
Right.
And all of a sudden, DCS's referrals had dropped.
Right.
And so, and of course, they have to have children in the system because they are money-driven, and each child has a price tag on their head.
Right.
In
That's
the child
horrifying.
welfare.
Yes, we knew it was bad, and then when I met you, I realized that it was even worse than I had originally thought. And I knew that we have a long way to go in terms of education and just educating the public on what's really going on and how these things are working to actually usurp parental rights and, freedoms for children and families and constitutional rights, of course. But that well-being child check situation was the catalyst for me to think, maybe I need to get more politically involved and watch this closer, because if they're doing this, what else are they doing?
Well, and who are the commissioners?
Exactly.
I mean, that was the first time so many people who is this commissioner that is telling us to do this, right?
Yes, and so then that launched into a huge opportunity to start doing some research about who was really leading our state in terms of education, and it just one thing led to another, and I became more and more politically aware of what was really going on, much to my dismay, in Tennessee. And then we started engaging, a larger network of people, and I connected with you. And then one huge concern last year that you just mentioned was the at-risk boarding charters.
Right.
And it was legislation, HB 1214 is what we were dealing with last year. And that particular piece of legislation, the only reason it got on my radar is because originally, and it's funny that you should mention that the caption is supposed to state what the bill really is, was that particular piece of bill, if you read the caption, what it had originally said, that its intentions were going to be to create another option for homeschooling families, which was going to be an additional option. But if the homeschooling families chose that option, their children would then be considered public school children. Well, that made absolutely no sense. And so when we saw that, we knew that there had to be more to it. And then when we started digging into the bill, we realized that really the bill was about the at-risk boarding charter facilities. And then what the state was going to use to identify at risk, the benchmarkers that they were going to use, that was even more horrifying. It was such a wide swath of who it was and who it could potentially be. And it was just a Trojan horse, because I remember, and I've made light of this, but it's really not funny. But one of those markers were children that come from dysfunctional families. And I was like, is there a such thing as a family that isn't dysfunctional? I thought every family was dysfunctional. I'm like, they would have to build even more and more at-risk boarding charters. But it went from chronically absent to truant to abused children to neglected children to juvenile delinquent.
Substance abuse.
Yes, disabilities. So a child that has autism could potentially earn a bed at this at-risk charter with a child that was a juvenile delinquent.
Yeah, who was stealing cars.
Right, or who had assaulted someone, or, who knows? I mean, the list just goes on and on.
What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. and so then I, started really thinking about this, and I thought, I've noticed a consistent march toward the medicalization of schools, and I've written extensively about this. You can access those articles on my website at freeyourchildren.com. But it became apparent that there had to be some ulterior motives attached to this. One would be money, which you can speak to on that, because what happens in terms of money if a child earns a bed at one of these at-risk boarding charters?
Well, and when one of the first conversations that you and I had was about money, because I understand the money associated with child welfare, and I know that under Title 4E, they have to take a child to put a price tag on their head. They have to have a child in foster care before they can get any money to help the parents. Before they can provide services for the parents, they have to have the child.
Right.
And so
custody, physical custody of the child.
Yes, and in a foster care home, out of their home. They have to separate the parent and the child. And so I knew that already.
Right.
And I know how many billions of dollars that is. And then as you started educating me on TISA, and I actually pulled it up and I read it, and I think I called you back, or I sent you a message or something, and I'm like, look, if they have a foster child, they get 25% more.
Right.
So, and then with foster children, you have levels. So you have, this is so sickening to think about how we monetize children and put a price tag on them, right? So you have a level 1, it goes all the way up to a level 10. It can be as low as like $15 a day, all the way up to like $500 a day. So if you...
A day?
Yes.
That's a lot of money.
That's $16,000 a month.
For one child?
For one child. And so, and in particular, I ran for judge in 2022 for juvenile court judge out in Williamson County, because in Williamson County, they were going to build a new juvenile jail, which was going to have 48 mental health beds in it. And they were all proud of that, right? Well, all it would take would be for before I say that, they were going to pay for it with private equity funds.
Oh, wow.
So if you know anything about private equity has to make a profit, and they need a hefty profit.
Right.
They go for 25% a year on their profit. And so they were going to be using private equity funds to build this, and so they had to make a profit.
Yeah.
And so all it would take, and I was knocking on doors and telling people, I'm like, all it would take is for a juvenile court judge to adjudicate, not a doctor, not a mental health professional, a juvenile court judge to adjudicate your child as severely emotionally disturbed. And they would get $500 a day to put them in one of those mental health beds. And that's like $17,000 a month. And that times 48 beds.
Right.
And you've got a nice profit.
Yeah.
Now let's look at the boarding schools. So now the boarding schools, they're going to get the TISA funds. They're going to get the 25%. Now they say, when my very first talk on this, the boarding schools, before committee, was I'm like, oh yeah, I can just see DCS using these for foster kids because they can't find any homes for teenagers.
Yeah.
So they did do an amendment to the bill, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
They did an amendment that said that DCS could not put a child in a boarding school unless.
So there's always an unless, isn't it?
Unless the child already happened to be enrolled in a boarding school, and then they took custody, which is perfect for them. So a parent, let's say a parent ends up in juvenile court now.
Right.
I mean, let's just be real. Teenagers are a challenge.
Yeah.
Okay? They are a challenge. So many things can go wrong raising a teenager. And, you have parents in divorces. You have your teenagers that go out and get picked up by the cops. And you end up in a court somewhere.
Right. Or they can just be in public school and, someone can just make an accusation and they can find themselves in the DCS or the juvenile court system.
Right. And then you get in a court system and some judge says to a parent, I don't think you can raise this child, so I'm going to give you a choice. Either you put him in the boarding school or I'm going to put him in state's custody. Now, you and I know that can happen because we know of the homeschool as no school judges.
Absolutely, in Coffee County. And we highlighted this, and you and I both watched this unfold, and it's still happening as far as I know, because I'm still getting reports that there are still parents being denied their right in Coffee County, Tennessee to homeschool. And I have never, I'm 50, I'm going to go ahead, and I know most women don't talk about their age. I'm just glad to be alive.
Right.
So in my 50 years, I've never been in a juvenile court before, ever. So I didn't even know what that looked like. So when that was brought to the forefront, we went down to that particular area of Coffee County to that juvenile justice center, and we sat through some of those proceedings. And I don't think that I have ever experienced anything like that ever in my life. And one thing that I noticed, and I knew from this family's experience, that one of the things that the judge had done was already up front had threatened to send the child away.
Yes, absolutely.
If the parent did not put the child back in public school.
Right.
And, again, they were legally enrolled in a non-public school, which is considered a private school in the state of Tennessee. But the judge had told the mother if they didn't re-enroll the child, that they could potentially send the child away. And all this was caught on tape, and the tape was leaked, and you can still go back and access it. They referred to homeschooling, being no school. Well, when we were there, we heard the judge and spoke to families where they had been denied the right to homeschool their children, and they were so afraid that the judge was either going to send them to jail or take their child away. They would just do whatever the judge was suggesting. Exactly, because they were under the fear of having the child removed.
And the judge has the power to do that.
Exactly.
And so if we go back to these boarding schools, if a family ends up in that type of situation and a judge says to them, or even if in their own good faith, they think, okay, I'm going to put my child in this boarding school, and then DCS decides, well, you can't parent your child, and so we're going to put them in state's custody. So now, they're going to put them at least a level 3 or 4 if they have any type of disability or unruly or whatever. So they're going to be somewhere around $250 a day probably. Plus they get the TISA funds, plus they get the 25% bonus.
Yeah.
Because they have a foster child.
Right. And then let's talk about who's actually owning the facilities that are being built, and how are they making money, and who are they? Because I'm fairly certain, in my opinion, these are institutions, okay?
They are.
And history has shown us that that's not really an effective place to put individuals, especially children. I mean, what can go wrong? Lock a bunch of children up, in an institution. And these are charters, so no parent has to be on the advisory committee or the board. And what people need to understand is they kept saying, these are public schools, but there's a difference between charter schools and traditional public schools. And charter schools have far less accountability. And parents and taxpayers have far less say-so. Because charter schools are fundamentally taxation without representation because their boards are appointed and not elected. So these entities that would own these charters, they can decide who sits on the board.
Yeah, and who owns them?
Exactly. Good question.
Because I know now even juvenile detention centers are privately owned.
Right.
And I mean, there was just a story. Ben Hall just did a story about how he had talked about children being put in solitary confinement in Murray County, and it's privately owned.
Right.
And the guy who privately owns it has a PAC, and he's giving away money to politicians.
Yeah.
So I just can't. And we know institutionalization of humans doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, look at Clover Bottom in Nashville. Anybody who's been around Nashville for a long time, I mean, they know about Clover Bottom, which was a big, huge institution for disabled adults.
Right.
And the Department of Justice had to come in and put them under total supervision and then finally had to shut them down. And our commissioner of DCS last fall said that she looked forward to using the abandoned facilities at Clover Bottom for institutionalizing more children. So I think that's going to be one of the first boarding schools. Yeah,
and it's absolutely horrifying. And then we get into something that we haven't even discussed yet in this perspective is the fact that our tax dollars are going to be used to benefit private businesses.
Right.
And those private businesses aren't sunshineable, so there's no transparency to the taxpayer.
Right.
So how does the taxpayer even know that their tax dollars are being utilized correctly or fairly, and that there aren't things that they wouldn't necessarily agree with their tax dollars being spent on? So, and we're seeing more and more of this, in my opinion, and this is one of the reasons why we are so fundamentally opposed to school choice. There's a whole host of reasons why Free Your Children is opposed, but we've said over and over again, and the narrative has been across the board that all conservatives are love school choice. They want school choice. Well, their school choice, we already have school choice in Tennessee. We've said this over and over. What they're peddling is government school choice, which just really means that the government is going to control all forms of education because they're going to be funding private education as well. And, we've said absolutely not. This is creating it's expanding big government by creating all these cottage industries between the public-private partnerships because they're going to have a vendor list. And so all these private businesses are going to be supplying uniforms and transportation and curriculum and mental health services and counseling services and tutoring and charter schools and all these different things, but they're going to come from this list.
Well, the Department of Children's Services has 185 vendors, and the largest ones, and you say cottage industries, well, what happens is those cottage industries start getting bought up bigger and bigger and bigger. And like Youth Villages is the largest vendor of the Department of Children's Services with cajillion-dollar contracts.
Right.
And then you have this problem. So let's just take this a step further, because I know people are dying to know. So I have followed DCS since its inception in 1995.
Right.
And there was, in 2011, under Governor Haslam, he appointed Jim Henry as the commissioner. Well, Jim Henry was the CEO of Omni that had a $63 million contract with DCS when he was appointed commissioner.
Wow.
There can't be any possible conflict there.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think, how do you think they keep getting away with this? Just because of the amount of money that's flowing through that gives them this power to be able to march forward?
Well, and like you said, they're not transparent. So there's no way. I only knew because I started digging way back then in 2011, and I asked for open records and and started looking at the contracts, and I saw Jim Henry, and I started making noise about it then. Well, all of a sudden, Jim Henry is no longer DCS, and he becomes a chief of staff for Haslam. Well, that was a $60,000 cut in pay, so I know he didn't do it voluntarily.
Right.
So, and let's take foster care, because foster care is primarily private.
Right.
So if a child is abused in foster care, and I've done this, and I know how they react. If a parent tries to sue the foster care company, they say, oh no, they're private contractors. You can't sue us. You have to go sue the foster parent.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they've sewn it up from every angle that allows them to be able to continue, what they're doing.
Well, and if it was a state foster home, the parents or family would at least be able to go to the state claims court and maybe make a claims for that injury. Even though they couldn't sue the state for damages, they could make claims for injuries that occurred by a state employee.
Right. I'm sure you have heard horrifying story after horrifying story. What keeps you going? How can you continue doing this day in and day out and hearing this over and over, Connie?
Well, I would just say, first of all, I so enjoy people like you, right? Like the warriors, like I'm a Leo, I guess, so I'm a warrior in the field.
Right.
And the second thing is I have grandchildren. I have children and I have grandchildren. And I just know how dangerous and how deadly it is for us to keep on this path and not take any corrective action. And my grandkids all know, like I'm going down to, the legislature and, I'm fighting and protesting and doing Zoom calls and videos and, and they're like walking around me, seeing me doing a Zoom call like,
Right. Yes, that happens in my house as well. Or they'll be like, how long are you going to be on this live? And, they're dancing around over here, But we do it, like you said, because we know that there are others that are going to come after us, like our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and we're trying to leave it better than it was, when we were here, in order to preserve or attempt to preserve those parental rights and educational rights.
Yeah, and people continue to reach out to me.
Yes.
And those stories. And
or me trying to get in touch with you.
But, the real families that I see still caught up in it, these stories are so horrible.
Yeah, they are.
And I had a Representative Chris Todd was at a meeting, and I was talking to him, and I'm like, Chris, I've spent 28 years in law primarily representing people from their own, trying to protect them from their own government.
Yeah.
There's
a problem when that's happening. Absolutely.
And he was like, his eyeballs went like that. But, I truly have. I have been in federal cases with the Department of Children's Services. I have, I've been in, out of our 95 counties, I've been in at least half of those counties. I've walked in these little tiny counties like McMinn County and Lawrence County, and as well as the largest counties, and really, try to go in there and see all these problems, which are very similar no matter where you are.
Yeah, you're exactly right. What's one piece of advice you would give parents?
Well, I think parents, you really have to stay strong and get educated to be able to fight this battle. Parenting is, it's not for sissies, right? And we've got a mighty task.
Yes.
And the best, we have got to prepare those children to be able to step out into the world and from an education standpoint, from understanding the world, but also from understanding the world of how to work with conflicts between the individual and the state.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful advice, Connie. And I will urge viewers, if you're listening to this, you can contact Connie if you have questions about the work that she does, and I will link on my social media pages where you can find her as well. We want to empower you to be able to protect your families, to be able to protect your children, your educational rights, your parental rights, your constitutional rights. Do your research, ask questions. You need to get engaged. If you're not involved in the legislative process, you don't know what's going on, educate yourself, reach out to us. We would be happy to help. Thank you for joining us at For Your Children TV.